In this tutorial, we're going to look at the CSS property, the transform property. Open index from HP11-6 in code. I have it open over here. And if we load this page in the browser, what we are going to change is make this special offer appear larger and make this image rotate slightly. The value of the transform property we can set to a couple of different things. We have things like rotate, scale. With a scale, you can scale on the y-axis only, the x-axis only, or just by typing scale, it will scale both x and y at the same time. There's also a translate. So let's take a look at this example on W3C schools. This is a rotate 20 degrees. And you notice it just rotated what was a square box. If I change this to 0, it's just a square yellow box. But if we rotate, it just rotates the box. For the skew, this is what a skew looks like on a Y. If we skew X, not Z, that would be third dimension. Like that. For the scale, you can see we're only scaling the Y here, so it looks kind of stretched. X. So it made it super large. Sorry, I changed it made it large, even appearing off of our window. If we scale to make it smaller, we could use like a 0.5 value, and that made it look like that. Or we could scale it all together and make it really small. Okay, so with the scale and the rotate, we can use, with the scale and the skew, we can use X and Y axis, or just the value itself. So in our index page, let's find our CSS. And we want to find the figure selector. And we are going to add transform, rotate 3 degrees. All right, so remember what our image looked like before. Let's load this in the browser, and now our image is slightly rotated. So we could change this. You don't have to do this on your computer. I'm just showing you options. We could do negative and rotate in the other direction. Okay, now to make the special offer larger, we're going to use the scale, and that is in an ID called offer. So right below this text align center, let's add transform scale 2. This is going to make it twice as large. So let's take a look here as I hit the refresh button, and it is now larger. Let's continue to work in that index page from HP 11-6, where we just added the transform property. And in this tutorial, we're going to look at the transition property. So let's take a look on W3C schools before we get started. Transitions allow us to create some really cool effects. So here we have a red div that it creates a square, and by adding the transition property with a width and 2 seconds, we are going to change the width to 300 pixels because that's what happens with the hover, and in 2 seconds of us hovering, it will go from 100 pixels wide to 300 pixels wide. So if I move my mouse over here, as soon as I hover over this red box, it will expand. Okay, so that's how a transition effect works. Let's look at another example. This one is going to work on focus. So when I click in this text box, it is going to expand to 250 pixels in 0.3 seconds in an ease in and out motion. So watch what happens when I click in the box. Okay, and then one more example. This one, you can your transition, you can do a transition and put multiple values in it, similar to how we do our margins and paddings, where you can have the top, right, bottom, and left margins all in one. But you could also use just the individual transition properties, like a transition property, a transition duration, there's a transition timing function, and a transition delay. These are all on page 492, and I do recommend that you look at those briefly to see the different values that you could have for this. Okay, in this case, we are changing the width and height over 2 seconds, and it's going to go from 100 pixels by 100 pixels to 300 pixels by 300 pixels. So watch as I hover over the red div. Okay, so that's how you can create a transition effect using CSS. And I think I had a few students that used this on their projects, their website projects. Okay, so currently our page looks like this, and we are going to create a transition effect that when we hover over these menu options, they fade in. Find your Nav A section in your CSS, and right after that padding of 15 pixels, we're going to add a transition of changing the background color over 2 seconds, linear. Okay, now let's refresh and see what that looks like. Okay, nothing happens until we hover. And you see how it got darker, very slowly got darker. And then as we move our mouse over, it slowly fades out. And that's a transition effect.